is the storage providers in the context of Filecoin and or mining operators within the context of most other networks. So I am joined here with three storage providers or people that are relevant to the storage providing ecosystem within Filecoin. And shortly, I believe we'll have another person joining this panel who is a traditional crypto miner in Brittany, Kaiser from Griffin Mining. So just to kick us off, I figured I'd hand it over to you all to provide, just an intro of who you are, your work, and if you could just start to explain how you're addressing or accounting for the environmental impact of your operations as storage providers.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Altman, the COO of Seal Storage Technology. We're a storage provider here in North America with operations in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Montreal. Both of the data centers that we use 100% renewable energy. The one in Las Vegas is with a company called Switch that does 100% solar, and the one in Montreal uses hydro. And when we consider how to view our environmental impact, we looked at a number of different things in the market in terms of trying to figure out, should we go out and get a certification? Should we, if we were doing a certification, which certification would we use? And the more that we looked at it, it appeared to be a very disjointed industry. So we decided that what was best was to provide radical transparency in terms of what we were doing, how we were doing it, and then we also were looking for ways to do more than just self-reporting in terms of saying here's the emissions we did, or here's the energy usage that's tied to those emissions, and how we're reporting it. So what we're really focusing, again, is how to make that a more automated, trustless process using Filecoin, as well as some other technologies. When we looked at the industry, we saw that most people were reporting quarterly, biannually, annually. So it's kind of harder to make active decisions on how to decarbonize your company when you're reporting so infrequently. So we're actually also working to try and reduce that significantly to get to a point where we can do it weekly and then up to a point where it's actually real-time data, specifically with regards to energy usage.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Welcome. I'm happy to be here. My name is Hofland. I'm the co-founder of Decent. It's a data center slightly above Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We've been working with Alan from Filecoin Green for the last half a year to make our data center as renewable as we can. And we just finished installation last week of about 250 solar panels. You already saw on the screen an hour ago. We are offsetting about 40% of our yearly usage, and we are trying to offset even more. And the rest that we are purchasing is fully wind and renewable. So that's real awesome. We are in discussion with the roof owner to build even more solar so we can go to fully 100% renewable.
Hi there, my name is Jonathan. I'm the MD of Hofland Innovations. We're an investment firm in Sydney. We're at the start of our energy journey. We only just bought a solar farm last week. And as Alex said, we've been looking at the energy market and how do we become 100% verifiably run on green energy. And once you start talking to lots of consultants and experts, you realize it's really hard and there's lots of murkiness of the whole industry. That's why we bought our own solar farm, so we can point at that thing and say that's ours and we can decommission those credits. So yeah, our long-term plan is build out our storage and also make it 100% verifiably green.
That's fantastic. And it's obviously apparent that you all have a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge on how crypto and blockchain can be a real player in the renewable energy space. And it can help drive real, objectable action towards climate change, right? Obviously, as Alex mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of attention put on these mining operators in the context of Filecoin on storage providers about the energy consumption profiles. But it's not all bad. There are obviously some great players in this space. And whether it's specific to your own operations or something else that you're seeing within the industry, can you talk to all the innovation that you're seeing in this space on leveraging this technology to provide more publicly verifiable sustainability claims? And maybe first to start with you, because I know you're thinking about it more from an investment assessment perspective.
Yeah, so we're at the kind of the data collection stage at the moment.
Sure.
So we have 4,500 pieces of little hardware in the data center. They either do something or they don't do something, right? They sit idle or they're running some processes. At the moment, we are aggregating the data of like how much energy do they use when they're on a Zeus, how much energy do they use when they're on Hewlett Packard, and we actually had 7 Zeus engineers in the other day to change BIOS settings so we can understand every piece of hardware within the blades that we actually use. I think us as storage providers is actually our responsibility to drive innovation, and I think we're going to see the same thing as the Bitcoin industry, right? Like how do we make it more efficient long term, full stop, right? And the industry at the moment is not even set up for that. If you look at warranties from Asus or HP, you're not some bits of hardware you can't submerge. And if you look at the PUE, so we're actually in the most efficient data center in Australia. PUE is like 1.25, sometimes lower. If you know PUEs of DCs, some could be 2 or 2.6, the efficiency to actually cool the actual DC. So it's really interesting when you start working with Hewlett Packard, you realize they actually have to change their warranties for you to submerge so you can actually get better computation power. So yeah, I think, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
No, that's perfect.
But ultimately it's our responsibility, and you need to look at it from the whole stack, right? From solar farm to the SSD and the hard drives running in your DC. Just be super focused on everything.
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate that, and that brings me to another question I had in mind, which is, the scope of the coverage. When you're thinking about the environmental impact of your operations, right? You all are obviously front runners in the space, putting solar panels on your operations, on the roof of your operations and things like that. But from a server rack or from a mining rig perspective, are you looking into the embodied emissions associated with those hardware components? Because that'll give you significant coverage from a carbon accounting perspective. And it's, as you were just explaining, Jonathan, it's very, very difficult to do. So, Hidge, if you could explain some of that in terms of what you are thinking about.
Well, for us, it's a different story. We are actually the owners of the DC ourselves.
Sure.
So we are fully capable of seeing everything what's being used, even to the electricity or the lighting in the office area. We can scan everything, show everything. And what we are trying to build right now is have an API connected from the solar inverter, which will show us exactly how many kilowatts we are creating and at what time every few seconds. Then we are trying to build an automatic API in a database where all the servers actively storing and sealing are sending their usage to, also every second. And we will link both of them to a database which Ellen will control and live show it on the blockchain. So there is, we are ending the discussion. If people ask, how green are you, what are you doing, you just show them and end of story.
That's wonderful. And I want to make a note there. Will Alan actually be controlling that?
I'll be sending it to Alan and he will send it over to his engineers probably.
That's fantastic. And what are you doing in this context? How is your operation moving towards a decarbonized future?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're using in our data centers, again, we're using co-location, so we don't actually own our own data centers, but having mentioned the kind of renewable energy factor of those, we're putting in essentially smart PDUs, so basically just like a smart power bar that controls and shows us exactly how much energy is being used by each one of those ports on that energy bar, so that we can track specifically how much each component, what you guys were talking about before. It's really important to understand how these components all play into your energy usage, because that really is, at least from a scope 1 perspective, so a product perspective, not how much gas it took to move one hard drive or what the boat emissions were, but our actual scope 1, like what this product is doing. Energy is going to be the vast majority of that. So understanding what the true scope of that is what the task is going to be. And apparently you and I had similar ideas from across the ocean, but we would like to put all of that data directly onto Filecoin and seal it, because it's creating this chain of custody and historical immutable element to the data. I mean, for better or for worse, people can always look at and say, this is how good or bad this group was doing, and they could take us to task and say that you've made these commitments, you haven't made these commitments. So I think that's a large element of what Web3 is doing for this entire industry, and you have to be able to identify the type of problem that you have with real unbiased data.
That's fantastic. You touch on really two crucial points I want to circle around on. that first one being that end-to-end audit trail of immutable and verifiable data. That is absolutely crucial, not only in the context of storage providers and or mining operations to showcase how they're moving towards a decarbonized future or a net zero goal, but also in the broader spectrum of corporate sustainability goals and objectives. We are building some of these components. You are proving them right now. Oh, welcome. Another panelist here. I will come back to you in just a moment for a lovely introduction and get you in the combo, but just to close on this point, building these solutions, these Web3 native monitoring and tracking tools that create end-to-end audit trails to prove sustainability claims, that is something that is far above and beyond what we currently have in the traditional Web2 space. And it's so great to see you guys already starting to build some of those and implement them into your operations. So now, ever so quickly, introduction to Brittany Kaiser here of Griffin Mining. If you just want to provide the audience a quick overview of what you do at Griffin and how you are thinking about the environmental impact of your operations.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone, I'm Brittany Kaiser. I am chair of the board at Griffin Digital Mining. We started our Bitcoin miner about a year and a half ago with the specific focus to be the first, not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative miner. So to really concentrate on our ESG strategy in terms of not just only using renewable and nuclear energy and not choosing fossil fuels or even a fossil fuel mix for what we're doing and how we're mining our Bitcoins, but also to be investing in carbon sequestration, carbon removal, reforestation, and all of the types of ways that we can go above and beyond our small carbon footprint and actually be negative as a strategy. Now, what we have also been doing is working with Energy Web and a bunch of other folks specifically to look at how we can become completely transparent, where we can track and trace where all of our ASICs are actually plugged in, where how we can prove that we're actually using renewable and nuclear energy as opposed to fossil fuels, and how we can prove that publicly. So we're undergoing carbon emissions audits. We're going to be doing public ESG audits. We're about to list on NASDAQ, so we will make all of that information public and really to be collaborating with all of the top people in the industry to build these tools so that every other company can do this too. It's the only way that we're going to be able to prove to journalists and to legislators and regulators around the world that our industry is actually mostly full of really good actors that are trying to do the right thing, and that we can become a financial partner for investing in the large-scale development of renewable and nuclear energy sites and be a partner in helping achieve climate goals as opposed to an obstacle.
That's wonderful to hear. And a number of things that you just said piggybacked off of what Alex recently said when he introduced the term scope of emissions. And for those of you who don't know, there are generally three broad scopes of emissions, scope 1 and scope 2 being those direct emissions that are generated within the operational boundaries of your organization, and then the scope 3 emissions, those supply chain emissions that are generated from your upstream or downstream supply chain partners. Unfortunately, those scope 3 emissions are generally the ones that create the lion's share of the pie of your emissions profile, and they are the ones that are generally not accounted for. So could any of you, I know that you've done a lot of work in this space, but anybody else as well, talk about how you're thinking about specifically those hard to account for scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there just because we're in the midst of our first carbon emissions audit. So that has been really interesting for us, really digging into the nuts and bolts of how our business model works. Obviously, there's other Bitcoin miners that, for instance, are completely vertically integrated where they own the facilities where their ASICs are plugged into. Not everyone does, so we use a lot of co-hosts like Core Scientific and Coinmint, and these are businesses that specifically host ASIC mining machines, and so they make the direct business decision of how they are building out those facilities, what materials they're sourcing, where they're sourcing it from, and so we're looking at in terms of scope 3, obviously these are not our direct decisions, but do we have the ability to influence those decisions? So can we actually work with our partners where it's not a direct business purchase of ours, but say, hey, here's how you're sourcing some of your insulation, for example. You could actually be sourcing something that is either more efficient or something that has come from a greener source, et cetera and so forth. Can we get our ASIC miners to be delivered on cleaner ships, for example, when they're coming over from Asia. And so there's a lot of things that are not in our direct business control, so they easily go to scope 3. But really, we might have the ability to influence and therefore be able to green our supply chain. So that's really what we're looking at, things that are not just in our decision-making path, but if we go to scope 3, like, how can we not just say that that's something that we don't have any control over? Like, let's see if there are ways that we can actually influence that.
That's wonderful to hear. And is that something that's within, the realm of possibilities for you all as storage providers? Can you look into your supply chain and your suppliers and try to influence them in making carbon positive decisions?
For us, I don't think it's feasible. The orders we place are not that high that we can make a decision on their fronts. But the thing that we are trying to do, and as a data center, it's of course impossible to go off-grid.
Right.
You need continuity on all machines, of course. Otherwise, you will get slashed. The only thing we can do in the Netherlands, we have wind, but you cannot just randomly place a windmill somewhere in the corner. But what we do have is solar, but at night, of course, we don't. And the battery capabilities are not yet decent enough to use that too. So the only thing we can do is create the same amount of energy we use yearly with solar and prove it on chain. But adding the machines, manufacturing, the shipment, for us, it's a bit too much to do.
Yeah, being an investment firm, it has its pros and cons. And I think the pro here is our next shipment from Hewlett-Packard will come with some conditions. We want the hardware as cheap as possible, but we also want to know the complete supply chain of it. And it pains them when I say that, and I can see them sweat. But I'm going to stick to my guns and see where we get. Maybe I might not get all the way, but I might get halfway, and the next shipment I might get all the way there, right? So I think it's, for the people that are actually buying a good chunk of equipment, just really keep the heat on them 24/7 is really kind of our responsibility.
Yeah, wonderful. And it is those incremental gains that we can only ask for, right, in trying to influence some of those suppliers to move us towards a more decarbonized future. So that's great to hear that you're pushing on those levers from your angle. I want to pry into some of this a little bit more and talk specifically about the challenges that you all face with trying to procure renewable energy, maybe in the Dutch grid system, or here in Texas and in the US or wherever it may be. What are some of the challenges that you all have experienced with just trying to account for, mitigate the emissions, and then to source renewable energy to totally minimize the emissions that are generating from your power generation or your power consumption coming from traditional power generation assets?
Yeah, so for us, it's much easier, again, going back to this kind of smart power bar, to just say what's our specific emissions, or I guess what's our energy usage and tied to the emissions. But we do actually pull on the occasional third-party source when it comes to additional resources. Generally, those resources come in the form of additional compute power or sort of memory power, things like that have to come from other data centers, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe. Sometimes it comes all the way from India. And then getting sources, even in the US, right? Like we have some compute that we've got from the Midwest, and we have to analyze their energy grid, what's their energy mix, if they have renewables, what are the sources during the day, and you're just trying to line up all these different factors of saying that our usage is heaviest during, it's pretty consistent, but saying that during the day, if the Midwest uses 40% coal, how do we apply that to us? And then we have to go out and look for a kind of localized renewable energy credit, and then there's a lot of intricacies involved in localized grid analysis, which is not necessarily something that you expect to be doing when you're working with cutting-edge technology like Filecoin, is saying, how much carbon is being used in Midwestern Ohio. Like it's a very different element for us. So you have to bring in the right people, and then once we're able to try to find that, it's the information becomes relatively incomplete. But we try to mix that in with what we have, and then overbuy because it's there is limited information, and we try to kind of put that all together and make that public so that at least people can understand where we are, and then integrate our information and our data into their stack and say, okay, at least I've got transparency from this source.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd piggyback off of that to saying I didn't expect to be running a Bitcoin mining company and looking into technical solutions of how we can prove the exact energy source of where every electron has been energized from in a grid mix. That didn't seem directly in my wheelhouse. And so it's been really amazing to get the opportunity to meet experts in the energy industry, like some of the gentlemen back there that I've been working with closely at Energy Web and now Zero Labs, who are building out a lot of really amazing technical solutions to this, where we can start to think about how we actually track and trace these grid mixes, because right now we have some public sources of information, as you said, how a local energy grid actually works, what are the reports that come from the local energy authority, and then obviously renewable energy credits and other government incentives that might have some sort of certificates of tracking and traceability of what that power station is actually providing. But getting down to as granular of a level as we would like to is still actually quite an iterative process, and I think there's a lot of people in this room have been working together to try to figure out the best solutions so that we can get over that regulatory struggle that I feel like our entire industry is dealing with, where we're painted with the brush of not being thoughtful in terms of doing our part to achieve climate goals. And I really think that most people that are in this industry because they believe that these technologies will have a positive impact on the world for many different reasons. And so we don't ever want to be that obstacle or that hindrance to climate goals, absolutely not. So really doing our best at the moment to be working together to make sure that we can provide these solutions as soon as possible, not just for our individual companies tracking and traceability and auditing, but for the industry as a whole.
So in Australia, we've got a unique situation. We have lots of land and lots of sun. So really my problem is I really want to connect every piece of hardware that we have at the DC, almost the BIOS settings to some kind of DID. So we have a decentralized identifier that goes straight, so I don't have to do anything. Software, the BIOS and the software does it. That's really our dream state, because then I don't have to worry about anything. Everything is transparent and verifiable 24/7, 365. And for at the moment, we've got a couple of thousand pieces of hardware, right? But when that gets to a couple of million, it's going to get really, really hard work. So all the kind of data collection and recording needs to be done ASAP for us, really.
Yeah, sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah, well, we don't have that much land, and we don't have that much sun. I'd rather put my panels in Australia, but no, we have an extreme necessity, especially in the Netherlands, to make the usage visible. There's actually, if I quote this correctly, there's actually a stop on new data centers because the net is full. They cannot place any more data centers because we don't have any more power to connect them. It's an extremely dense country, of course. We were also lucky that we were accepted on getting our daily peak usage back to the grid, because also there's a stop on delivering solar energy during the day. But when we can make this visible for them, we can also apply this to other data centers, of course, in the Netherlands, which we have a large data center from Microsoft, and there are more, one from Facebook being built too. But it's really important for us to make the insight visible, where the energy is being used.
That's fantastic, and I can't believe that you're running out of land and power for data centers in the Netherlands. That's insane. So we've talked about some of the challenges in terms of data collection, and also there's been a few mentions of the regulatory uncertainty kind of playing into this in some of your jurisdictions. Can you speak a little bit to that? Is it right now, because of the uncertainty, really limiting some innovation or some opportunities, or is it kind of just, in a strange mix of things? Any takers?
Definitely, I would say regulatory uncertainty makes it more difficult to build. I spent most of my time in this industry working on regulation. I was lucky enough to meet Caitlin Long at the end of 2017, and I moved to Wyoming to work with her there for the past 4 years. I sit on a number of the congressional subcommittees on blockchain, fintech, and digital innovation. I've helped write and pass now 22 laws there, which we've used in over 20 different countries and 16 other states as kind of a digital asset legislative framework that we believe is actually conducive to the industry doing well. And now we finally have an executive order in the United States to finally take this seriously and get some federal legislation. And I think as soon as we started passing laws in this industry, which wasn't until 2018, we saw all of a sudden, tens of billions of dollars, now hundreds of billions of dollars of this industry now locating in the US now that there was some kind of certainty. I can only imagine the trillions of dollars that will come once we have a good federal framework. And many other countries that have had a good federal framework for a long time, like Switzerland, for example, have seen the financial benefits of being open to the digital asset industry and working directly with technologists and legislating with them as opposed to legislating against us, right? And so I think it's very important for everyone here that actually, has a company in the industry to have that contact with legislators and regulators, engage with them openly, write them letters, call their office, show up and testify in Congress or in Parliament, depending on what country we're talking about, and openly engage and say, hey, I'm an executive from this company in the blockchain or digital asset industry, and we would love you to vote yes on this bill, or we would love you to vote no on this bill, because it would be good or bad for the industry. Like, make your voice heard, definitely get super involved, because it's the only way that we're going to find a regulatory infrastructure that actually makes sense and allows us to build our businesses and have the positive impact that we intend to have in the world.
Yeah, I could say Canada has been pretty ominously quiet about the whole thing, which doesn't make for a fantastic regulatory environment. I mean, the position it seems like the government tends to take is it's not a problem, and if you don't make it a problem, then it's probably okay. And that's how we got, Canada obviously has Bitcoin ETF. We've got public Ethereum vehicles. I know there are some in the States, obviously, there's Grayscale and things like that, but we have like an actual kind of spot ETF, and we've had it for a long time. So when we, talk to and we're a Canadian company, we have operations in the US, but I mean, we're governed under the laws of Canada. We do talk to the regulators. We submit, a yearly audit, and we just basically have to suggest and say, hey, this is the closest that this looks like, right? I mean, the way that we earn coins, the way that we regulate ourselves looks like this other industry, and therefore we feel like it should be regulated as such. So generally, they're pretty reasonable, but those could be famous last words. So who knows?
You mentioned it in the Dutch context, but I wanted to ask further if you have any understanding of the regulatory uncertainty there, or in Europe writ large, that is maybe hindering progress in this space.
It's not my field, so I have no clue. But it was a mess chatting with the government about what are you actually doing. And one of the most important things we needed to make sure of is the creation of Filecoin isn't taxed like when you're selling a product. For us, it was the most important thing because our main income is creating new Filecoins at the moment. Eventually, it will be deals, of course, but for now, it's just making new blocks. And we needed to make sure that there was not added tax on top. So eventually, we have been chatting with the government, and we have been emailing them and sending letters, and it was accepted to make a few separate businesses for the hosting, for the mining, and for the investments. So we've done that, and now it's agreed upon that we do not pay tax on top. But for the rest, I don't know the regulatory things in the Netherlands about this mining structure. We do not have many miners because you might not know, but do you know the electricity prices in the Netherlands? What we pay per bare kilowatt? Take a guess.
I don't know.
8 cents. What do you pay on average? For the
6.
6 cents. Yeah, well, when Corona began, I paid...
Before credits.
Yeah, like the bare kilowatt price. Before, when Corona started in 2020, we paid 3 cents on average that year, because of course all the companies were shut down. Now we pay 25 cents, excluding tax, excluding import, per kilowatt. So the solar thing is really important for us financially too, but it's a mess.
Those have to be some of the highest rates in the world.
Yeah, well, welcome to Europe. Also, you are complaining about gas prices of $4 a gallon. We pay about 12. So, yeah.
Also, to just add to that, recently the European Union or European Parliament was going to have a particular meeting on the power usage of crypto miners. So that was not Bitcoin specific. That was talking about all crypto mining. All proof of work really is what they were looking to discuss. And that discussion has been delayed. So it was supposed to happen 2 weeks ago, I think. And because of Ukraine, everything was pushed. And so that discussion hasn't happened yet, but it'll be the first main meeting. We obviously had one in US Congress about a month ago. And so Europe is following that. So I'm going to be looking closely at what they have to say in those discussions. But I really do think that what we're probably going to see is that governments are going to start working to incentivize miners using renewable energy and be able to hopefully track and trace some of those credits directly to the mining company instead of just through the local energy authority, which actually cuts off a lot of people in the crypto industry who are financing a lot of the large-scale renewable and nuclear developments. We're actually not directly getting the credits, and it's a very difficult process to even prove that we're using renewable energy because we don't get the credits from the government. But I've seen state by state in the US that states are considering making specific renewable energy incentives for mining companies and then being able to trace that through their energy usage and credit the company in and of itself. So we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
That's great to hear. And I mean, it's interesting that you talk about the flow of those credits through all the intermediaries. And it seems to be a perfect area in which Web3 native monitoring, reporting, and tracking systems need to be built to facilitate a more streamlined approach to these credits being formal, the formation of them, and then ultimately the delivery of those credits to the appropriate people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thinking right now on a technical level exactly how we prove that out, and then how, not only how are those credits tracked and traced, but then is there a way of tracking and tracing the green coins that come out of that type of mining? And so will there be a premium on those green coins? Will there be completely different markets for investing in coins that were created with renewable and nuclear energy without much of a carbon footprint? Like, perhaps. I definitely think, we're starting to see green mining ETFs coming out. And so I think there's going to be more of that, where a lot of funds that have an ESG mandate are only going to be able to invest in coins that have tracking and traceability from renewable energy production. So I do think that will go in one direction, whether or not there's a premium, whether or not we want to have a discussion on that threatening the fungibility of certain coins. Like, I think we need to make sure that it doesn't do that. But those markets are already starting to show a preference for green mining specifically. So the more that we can prove that, the better it will be for the industry.
One thing I want to quickly focus on before we finish is we have to remember when the Filecoin virtual machine comes out and you have the Filecoin network, it's going to be vastly more efficient than Web 2, right? Because Filecoin is not a competitor to Amazon, it's a competitor to multiple industries, right? So once that Filecoin virtual machine comes out, right, compliance almost goes away, right? Because it gets written into the contract at the top level, so you don't need lots of people checking, right? So we just have to remember Filecoin only uses, energy consumption on my P&L is 1% of the bottom line, right? Bitcoin's 50%. So it's already energy efficient compared to other consensus mechanisms, but long term it's going to be great for the world, great for energy. We're currently writing an ESG report, so we're kind of getting into this now, but we're just excited about it.
That's fantastic to hear. I am equally excited. We could spend the next 4 hours talking about
Cheeky
that.
plug.
But in the interest of time, I want to hand it over, see if anybody has any questions. I think a few of you may be teaming to ask these storage providers, these miners, some of their crucial energy consumption questions. Anyone? Please.
I have to talk about your electricity price. So to equate, so everyone kind of understands, when I say 8 cents a kilowatt hour, right, that equates to, when I throw out my guess of 8 cents a kilowatt hour, that equates to $80 a megawatt hour. So what he basically said is I'm paying $250 a megawatt hour for my energy. How do you approach your operations in managing that cost, and how are you guys actively trying to work with the government to decrease your energy prices?
Well, one of the reasons we started out on Filecoin in mid-2020 was because we were owning a solar farm, an Ethereum farm. But we were using about 100K euros a month on power. even with the 3 to 4 cents we were paying that year. So luckily I sold it, otherwise we will be bankrupt now. The problem now is, of course, with the instability, with the war in Ukraine, the prices will go more and more and more. We actually saw a peak price of about 75 cents for 1 hour a week ago, when the war, or 2 weeks ago, when the war started. So you're paying over $1 per kilowatt then. There is not much we can do. What happened the last 4 or 5 years is all the miners left. They went to locations where the power is cheaper. You have some data center in Belgium, they were still okay, but everything gets more expensive there, and I don't see this being resolved any day soon. And there's not much we can do with the government. We can email them, ask them for a rebate or anything else, but that won't happen. So the only thing we can do is take control in our own hands, and we will try to get every kilowatt we produce more than our own usage during the daytime, we will get back for free at night. So if you just increase the solar capacity, we will have zero energy use. That's our main goal. But for now, it's just it's extremely difficult. And I see the prices going up, the gas price going up, the gasoline prices going up, electricity prices going up. I don't see that ending anytime soon.
High prices is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It kickstarts an innovation cycle, so you have to be more wise on how much GPU power is left there sitting, not working, right? So I just see it's just a natural cycle of crypto markets, of of how they work. So I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and I think it will also spur more companies to become completely vertically integrated, not only looking at off-grid energy sources, but also being able to take direct advantage of government credits, which is the only way that it works right now. And so a lot more people will be investing in building large-scale renewable facilities so that they can get those credits directly, and then that helps manage the energy price. Even in the United States, in many states, that actually means your energy prices are negative and you're being paid to use and create that energy. So in the end, that's why I say I see this entire industry, the mining industry, as one of the most incredible partners that the government should be looking to help finance getting to our climate goals, because we're able to build much more large-scale renewable energy and nuclear facilities because it can be financed through the crypto mining, whereas many other industries are not investing in that. You see a lot of Facebook, Google, Amazon, large-scale data centers that are just being plugged into a fossil fuel mixed grid, and that's what it is, and they're happy to plug in and just do that. But the development of renewable energy, because of the way that especially Bitcoin mining is incentivized, makes more sense. So we're spending the money on renewable energy facilities and nuclear facilities because the grid and fossil fuels don't make any sense.
You heard it here first. Filecoin storage providers and mining operators are driving the grid to a decarbonized future. With that, we have to close, but thank you all for a great conversation. Thank you to the panelists. Fantastic.